Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our webinar, Bidirectional Text Part 3, Mastering Bidirectional Content for Translators and Localizers. My name is Ilango Charan, and I'll be helping to make introductions for today's event, and I'll be going over some housekeeping items. So, as a reminder, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the Unicode Consortium YouTube channel. We've received some questions in advance, and we'll address the ones that are of most interest of the topic of BiDi, and we'll be taking additional questions as time allows. Please submit your questions for the team using the chat or the Q&A box. Today's session on BiDi will discuss common issues in handling left-to-right and right-to-left text, especially the challenges faced by right-to-left translators, and what they can do to mitigate challenges using the existing translation tools. The next hour will be handled by our BiDi experts, starting with a short presentation providing background information, followed by a Q&A period to address as many of the submitted questions as possible. Let me introduce you to our webinar team. Moriel Schottlender is a physicist turned software engineer turned systems architect, currently working on modernizing Wikipedia's systems. She's an open source enthusiast, right-to-left language support and localization evangelist, and a general domain hoarder. Osama Shabaneh started his career 35 years ago as an Arabic-English translator and localization specialist in the technology industry. He then transitioned to lead localization projects spanning more than 100 languages, including half a dozen right-to-left languages, across different divisions in Microsoft. He experienced firsthand the unique challenges that right-to-left translators and developers face as they try to provide a seamless customer experience from a language perspective. Annie Dowling is the Community Engagement and Marketing Manager at Unicode, and I'm Ilango Charan, the Vice Chair of the Community Engagement Team at Unicode. Okay, let's get started. And Osama, we're over to you.
Thank you, Elango. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and appreciate the Unicode Consortium for inviting me to this session. So just to preface my maybe 2 or 3 slides that I'll be presenting, I don't think I'll be presenting anything that will be new to many of you. My talk is not technical. It's just a reflection of the things that I've noticed over the past 35 years as I engaged with right-to-left languages, both from a translation perspective and program management and product management perspective. Here I'll list some of the things that I've seen over the past few years as far as challenges that we face as RTL translators. Number 1 is what you translate is not necessarily always what you get. So you're in your translation environment, you have a tool, you're translating, everything looks great. Things happen meanwhile from a code perspective, and the final product doesn't show the same formatting that you have seen when you translate. So things become left to right, mixed text becomes a little bit jumbled. So that's the biggest challenge I've seen over the years. Again, with what makes BiDi is the fact that you have mixed language text, and this is something that we always experience as a challenge. Number 2, right-to-left translators face a double-edged challenge. As I mentioned, when you translate, the tools that you might be using might not be right-to-left enabled. So you end up facing some of the mixed text scenarios, and you have to always try to figure out exactly what text goes where, so that the tools themselves might not be enabled. And then post-translation, when you have the final product, things might not show right to left. So you end up with bugs on your plate that you're not sure exactly what to do with. So these 2 things usually happen in parallel. Number three, translators have limited control to address challenges and may not have the technical know-how to offer solutions. So you get a bug on an issue for right to left, and you're not exactly sure what to do with it because the code might not be enabled for RTL. The HTML markups might not be in the right places. So in my experience, many translators just get a little bit stuck in trying to fix things that they're not responsible for. And number four, different operating systems and applications behave differently. So you fix an issue for Windows, you end up maybe introducing something else for Android or for iOS. So different systems you apply their RTL enabling in different ways. So you're not exactly sure. And so you have to test all of these scenarios, all these operating systems to ensure that things behave correctly. So I spent maybe 10 minutes looking at certain sites on the web and in some applications, and it's not difficult to pinpoint things that might be going wrong for right to left. So I speak Arabic, so that most of these are in Arabic. So if I start with the top left, evidently, I mean, when you look at that first line with the mixed scenarios, so you end up with the left to right and right to left all in the same sentence. So starts with Arabic, and then that last word should be in a different place. So you end up breaking that right to left run. Similarly, this run is also broken for the last line where you have that URL. So the Arabic that is at the far left should have been at the far right. And in the middle here, this is from Al Jazeera. So that plus sign should be on to the right of the J. It shows up on the left. This is common scenario. So this is where you can maybe do some manipulation using right to left markers. On the right, this is from Google. So that first line, it's mixed because you have Google in it. So Arabic reads well, but then Google shows on the right instead of the left. And then this is, of course, aligned left instead of aligned right. Moving down, same thing. Once you have English in the middle of Arabic, then your scenario, your run becomes a little bit jumbled. So you end up with the wrong reading order there. From CNN, similar things. CNN should have been on the very right. At the very bottom, this is common as well. The translator don't have much control over the arrow. This says back, so the arrow should actually be pointing right rather than left because it's back and right to left. And then I thought of adding this, the Copilot image as well as we think about AI and prompting from Microsoft. So you ask it a question in Arabic, it gives you the answer in Arabic, but then because you have Expedia and Booking.com, the entire run becomes a little bit jumbled. So you can't actually read that second line because of the mixed text scenario. And of course, that last line, you have the exclamation mark should be to the left. So as we think about how translators are going to be looking at maybe validating right to left in the future, one thing to be cognizant about is having mixed text in prompting and in replies for AI. It's my last slide. So how do you mitigate these things? Again, as I mentioned, there is limited control from a translator perspective. What I would say is that don't live with mediocre translation solutions. If you have a tool that is supplied to you by a client or by a vendor, then push back when you think that you can improve your situation or your scenario when it comes to translating in that tool. I mean, I had some limited success in the past in Microsoft where we actually ended up adding these right to left control characters in some of the tools that we have, and these things help a little bit. So make sure that your voice gets heard. And then when you get number two, when you get an issue asking you to fix a right to left bug because of mixed scenarios, push back. I think sometimes the developers don't know what to do. They might need help. So I think getting a little bit aware of what the developers go through and maybe giving them some guidance might help. So like my recommendation is to avoid unnatural tweaking or by die text and always push back at developers. Number three, it's hard to do, minimizing bidirectional elements in translations as much as possible. I know it's for some legal concerns. Sometimes we have the branding elements that need to stay in English, for example, like the company names and so on. I don't necessarily believe that's the right thing to do. I do think that going forward, we should recommend that even branded elements should also be either translated or better transliterated. So I don't see a reason why we should be looking at the legal implications going forward. Again, with numbers, you cannot necessarily control that, but even with phone numbers in Arabic, for example, you can get rid of the spaces in between the phone number so that you can minimize potential issues downstream. And then number four, just getting familiar with the technical issues that govern how the right to left markups are designed. Unicode control characters, for example, can help. So getting familiar with those, although it might not be as technical as you should be, but I think getting to know these things can help you manipulate, fix, and give guidance also to your developer community. And I can, if you wonder what right to left control characters are, you can go to Notepad, right click, and you can see here a list of control characters that you might want to utilize to fix some of the things that you have been seeing. So I've had limited success with these. Sometimes they actually cause maybe crashes downstream. They might backfire, but in most cases, they could help you as you translate and you want to fix things that have BiDi elements in there. So that is my last slide. The one thing I would say is that we have seen significant, big improvements over the years from a right to left perspective. So, you know, I think 10 years ago, the issues that we have seen are way much bigger than we see today. So we have seen improvements, but more can be done. So with that, Moriel will be next.
Thanks, Osama. Give me 1 second to share. All right. Okay, so thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm hoping to go over a little bit what we do on Wikipedia. So some of the challenges that we're encountering with especially multilingual and user-generated content. So I'd like to give you a little bit of kind of background on Wikipedia. I don't know how many people know that Wikipedia is not just a single website. We actually have Wikipedia and sister websites. We have Wiktionary, Wikisource, Commons. We have quite a bunch, 11 other sister websites, and we support quite a lot of languages. So we support 400 languages on the UI. 33 of them are right-to-left languages. But we also have 300 content wikis, and content wikis are wikis where, so English Wikipedia, French Wikipedia, etc. They're each individual, so they are not translations. They're each individual wiki that has their own articles. Sometimes they have other articles and other wikis. And they have their own workflows too. And everything is generated by volunteers, editors who come in and generate the text. We do have translation tools available between wikis, so you can go into I don't know, English Wikipedia and decide to translate a specific article into Swahili or Arabic or whatever it is. But this is a starting state. So what you end up with is an article that later is a standalone, is being edited separately. So it's not like a running translation that we have. Each one is a completely separate community with its own users. We also use Wikitext markup. Now, you might ask yourselves, why are you using our bespoke markup and not, you know, something more standard? And the reason is we started before there was a standard markup. And so this is our markup. It's called Wikitext. And we have limited HTML support in our editing. But it is very, challenging when you write either content or translations, as we see a couple of examples, to kind of mix when you're in right to left context, as Osama showed, when you kind of like have to switch, right, between the right to left to the left to right, and HTML markup is the left to right. So we're trying to kind of mitigate that. And what we do is we use some markup templates because those we can do in the original language. And so our main thing is that everything in Wikipedia, or almost everything in Wikipedia, is user-generated. You have the article content itself, and of course the title, the username. Someone can sign up on Farsi Wikipedia with a Farsi username and then go in English Wikipedia and have the same username appear. So we have that kind of context happening. And of course, like, the content. We do separate between the UI translations and the content, but everything, including the UI translations, are user-generated. We have a system that allows anyone to come in, and just like anyone can come in and edit Wikipedia, anyone can come in and translate Wikipedia. And so because of that, we really needed to come up with ways to make sure that we are not just dealing with experts who kind of know the challenges. We're dealing with everyday people. Some of them are experts and some of them are not. And then what kind of tooling we can kind of come up with to make sure that everybody kind of, can get over the usual challenges we see with Bidi content. And so as an example, here's an article on English Wikipedia. So this idea of having Bidi text in articles is very, very common. As this example shows, this is, a name. It is an English Wikipedia, but we will put in, the original name. And so that is already a context that you have by the Bidi content within. And so how do we handle these kind of things? So in the content side, we try to make sure that we have markup templates. And so you can see here as an example, so in Latin, it would be something like this. It's very similar to, if you work with any other markup language, they also have kind of like, so sort of templates. This is kind of similar to that. So you have the template name and some parameters. When you work in right to left languages, we will translate it for you. So then the flow will continue happening in most cases. Sometimes you do have a parameter that is in HTML, you can't avoid it, like, some URL, that's fine. But for the most part, you will not need to switch this context between right to left and left to right. And we have some contexts that allow us to actually later add things like HTML spans or Bidi control characters. So we don't have to have users know which control character to use or whatever. They just know the templates. And so we can see, if we go into the same page as before, a little bit of an example. So the top one, this one, shows what it would look like in the markup language. So the user would write, this would make it bold. And then here is the template, the green thing, lang X, the name of the language, and what needs to be written here. And then later on, what would happen is that it would parse as a wrapper span that we, the engineers know how to do, we know how to do, we know what the rules are. We can also change it and tweak it if needs be. That is allowing this to be right. So we don't have to have our translator or writers know the rules. We can just give them tools and then we sort it out. And then what happens in the interface, because we also translate interfaces, we have a system called Translate Wiki. Translate Wiki is an open wiki installation. Anyone can go in. You can all go in, sign up, and help us translate. We also have other open source, websites in there that are using it. And so anyone can come in. There's a pretty kind of like, a UI for translations. And then what happens is that the system in the back end turns each one of those translations into JSON files that we can then use in the system. We do have an extra JSON file with a language code that does not exist. It's QQQ, that the developers, every single time that any sort of initial language for the UI is added, they must also add a QQQ thing. And that is an explanation and context about whatever you're translating. So the translators, because different languages, as we all know, have potentially different ways of treating verbs versus everything else, we give them a little bit of a context of like, this string is for an action that does something. And so it makes it easier. And that is where we can also put a little bit of rules of like, beware, this might be bidirectional, beware. And so we can give guidance a little bit to our translators. We do have some helper functions. And so we have things like gender, where you can, put the options based on what the pronouns the user chose. We have plural rules. I wrote very simple ones. As probably you all know, these can get really complicated, and we support that. And we have Bidi. So this thing, a translator can use as kind of a template. They don't need to know what it does later. We in the code later in the presentation will decide whether we need to put it, between BDI tags or whether it, renders behind spans, depending on the contents of the UI. And so we were trying to make sure that our translators don't need to understand. We also have these kind of things for control characters when that is relevant. And so this is Translate Wiki, translatewiki.net. Feel free to come and help us. This is what it looks like. If you're trying to translate something, you have here the box where you put your translations. It is ready for right to left. This is what you will translate. Go back to page 1. This is the parameter. And then you have here the explanation, title link or something, and then the name of the page. And you have some suggestions based on previous translations. The user will come in, write their thing. Everything will be in the correct order and correct direction. And then usually other users will come in and just approve that it's correct, and then it'll go into the system. And so I think the biggest thing about Wikipedia is that everything is user-generated. And so we had to make sure that our users can use it regardless of how much they know. We have quite a lot of languages. I think we're one of the biggest single website, biggest support of languages online, 400 languages, 33 out of them are right to left. We have a lot of cases where it's mixed up. We separate translations for UI and content, and we have helper functions to help our users. And that's it from me. I'd be happy to answer questions.
All right. Thank you, Moriel. Thank you, Osama. So let's get to our questions. Presenters, if you can, have your camera on or your display photo visible. And just as a reminder, in this Q&A, we received some questions in advance. We'll address these during the webinar, and we'll also take additional questions as time allows. So also, please remember to ask questions relevant to the topic of this event. And our time is limited, so I apologize in advance if we can't get to all of your questions. So going to the questions. Our first question is from Caleb White, and the question is, I'm curious to understand the end-to-end best practices, and then in parentheses, he writes, how developers should structure text for a successful Bidi through to T9N.
So I have to admit, I'm not entirely sure T9N, or I assume it's something like I10. Right. And
T9N might be a shortcut for an abbreviation for translation, but maybe
that makes sense.
Yeah, maybe we can generalize it to localization. And
thank you for that. But yeah, so I can tell you what we do in Wikipedia. So as engineers, because we support so many languages, and we also have engineers all over the world, we're trying to be very conscientious. And I think that the key that we're trying to do is to consider that anything that will be either another puzzle message, what we call a message that's embedded inside your own message, or a user-generated anything, we have to consider that it might be reversed. So when we build the UI, we make sure that a lot of the strings that we put in the UI are already isolated, either again BDI tags or spans with directionality, or we try not to use the control characters for various just technical reasons. It's really hard to kind of like control, but sometimes when we need to, we definitely do. But I think that the main thing is just as engineers be very, very aware where these kind of things can happen, and even slightly fix over, right? Like, even if the odds of something like that happening is low, but I know that something here, we just try to wrap everything. And I think that is probably the best practice I can offer, to just raise the awareness a lot. And the second one is from the engineering side, to be a little bit more aware and do a little bit of search. There's not a whole lot of options there, but there are some options of what to use. Like, do you use a span versus BDI tag versus control character? And I think that is helpful for engineers to kind of know more or less to avoid problems. And I think this is something that doesn't take years to learn. There's pretty clear guidance out there, and just be aware of that guidance and try to put it in. And then in terms of the translation, I think that what helps us a lot is that QQQ thing that I showed you, that explanation, because it helps our translators, even the ones that don't really encounter Bidi or don't really know, to kind of get the context of, okay, there might be something here that I need to pay attention to. And this is why I have this magic string in the middle that makes no sense to me, but I need to keep it. up there. So there's an explanation and a little bit of context to our translators to make sure that they also kind of like, stick with it.
And maybe one thing I would add is maybe doing less is sometimes better than doing more, meaning that you can rely on the OS itself or the browser language itself to make sure that right to left gets enabled. So you don't have to do much in your application or in your solution. Just figure out what the system does and just point to that.
Okay, our next question is, this is from, sorry, Boris Grushko. And it says best practices for handling right to left issues and raising awareness among stakeholders. And the second part also seems interesting, just in case the best practices for handling right to left issues has been covered. But if it hasn't, please address that too.
I mean, for the stakeholders, I'm assuming that you're talking about your developers or your clients and things like that. And this has been maybe one of the biggest challenges that I have seen. Sometimes the developers rely on you as a translators to go and fix things, but as long as they're doing the right thing. So meaning that, you just figure out the strategy for right to left languages or markets. And if you don't have the right strategy as a company to go into these markets, then you don't have to go and localize or translate your UI or your content. So it starts with that strategy. So, I mean, I'm hesitant to actually go in and translate as a company before I have that strategic go-to-market approach. So raising those strategic questions with these different entities makes sense, and this is the first step before you translate or you localize into these markets. And maybe offering them some suggestions, guidance as far as how to enable right to left. Maybe some smaller companies might not be aware. So giving them some guidance as a translator might go a long way in ensuring that as a translator, you have an easier way of localizing text downstream.
I'll kind of riff on the question a little bit and tell me if this is outside of what you know, but do you have any tips or strategies for getting people to take these concerns seriously and say, we need to address these problems and it's important?
I mean, for me personally, I think the biggest success I've had is starting with the marketing organizations in the company. So I think marketing, once they have that strategic go-to-market approach, then they can influence. So again, I think it's a matter of identifying who you can talk to in these different organizations and to ensure that they have the influence that needs to be utilized across the board. It's not always easy, but it starts with strategy. You can never have maybe an easy way of localizing, translating the right way without having that strategic approach in place. And enabling for right to left languages, that's the start. Otherwise, you end up translating and you end up actually making things worse for the user because they cannot read your text and the feedback will be detrimental.
Next question. This is from Harold Ventler. How do we handle Bidi content in XML?
So I can try and tackle that. I think the immediate response is very difficultly, but I think that is kind of the key here, right? Like XML inherently uses tags that are in Latin, and then you need to put information in there that might be in Bidi or might be right to left. So we encountered something like this, not in XML, in JSON, which is very similar. And in JSON, it could actually be a little bit weirder because in right to left languages, if you mix it up, the keys and the values it's not clear which one is the key and which one is the value when someone looks into it, which is horrible. Honestly, I have to be very honest here. What we did is we realized that it's just very, very difficult to edit these kind of things in a text box, and we created a little UI for it. And so we created a little tool that reads the XML or the JSON and allows you to kind of like add the values inside like individual stuff or add another value in, and that's what we did. Does it answer all of it? No. But it's very, very difficult otherwise to deal with all of these contexts that go back and forth. And I think that in these kind of situations, if you deal with it a lot, I think we should consider having a UI that edits your either XML or JSON files.
So our next question comes from Bishar Bajat. The question is, what happens when there are Latin words, parentheses, or punctuation in the middle? I imagine in the middle of a text of perhaps right to left.
Yeah, and I think we covered some of these examples in the presentations. I mean, ideally, everything should flow the right way. You start with right to left. You have some Latin text. It reads well, as long as your right to left enabling has been done. So what happens, there is an algorithm, Unicode algorithm, everything flows the right way. Again, unless your content is not enabled, then it becomes jumbled a little bit, like the examples that we showed. So it's easier for neutral characters like parentheses or punctuations. It's more difficult with text because with text you can end up actually confusing the user more than not.
Our next question is a little bit open-ended, and feel free to answer as well as you can. What are the latest tools, technology, and trends being used for Bidi? This is from Paula Hunter. Any tips, Moriel, Osama?
Or anybody else?
I don't know if there's it's a tough one. I don't know if there's trends necessarily. I'm gonna let others contribute if they know things that are coming up. I think that there are definitely tools and there are technologies, as we showed. Some of them are kind of the templating, the trying to I think that there is as we see here also in the comments with kind of like the XML editors that some of them are doing. So there's a trend to move towards a little bit more of the visual way of editing, which helps separate concerns between kind of like right to left, left to right. And I think it really depends on the context of what you do. So like we had the real need to make sure that our users, it's really easy for them to wrap something in a Bidi statement. So we added tools for that, but I'm not entirely sure that there's a lot of common tools. I will let Osama, please.
Yeah, I mean, as Elango said, it's an open-ended question. I think the one thing I'm thinking of as we think about innovation in the future is, how do we use screen readers through AI, for example, to, read text, right to left text to ensure that it reads well, it's not confusing. So I think AI probably is going to present some good opportunities in the future to, again, read text, understand the text, and give maybe some tips to the translator or the different stakeholders that this reads well, it's right to left, and mixed text doesn't offer or mixed text doesn't generate any confusing reading for the user. But again, as I mentioned before, I think the whole, when it comes to coding and markups, these things have come a long way over the past 10 years. So things are much better today from a user perspective and translator perspective than they've been in the past. But again, the one thing I could think of is, how do we utilize all of the AI capabilities to ensure that we have better tooling and solutions to uncover, prevent, and maybe fix things in the future.
I would like to add one more thing. I think I agree 100%. I would like to add one more thing. I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to also advocate for these things, because I think this is why we see a lot of problems online, that it's not like you can't fix them. It's a lot of websites don't realize it's a problem, don't see it. And I think this is one of the things that we can be a little bit of, whether it's the new stuff with AI or the new stuff with like, interfaces online, to be advocates that this is something that's worth supporting. And that relates to like how to do that with the previous questions. But I think this is something that we can also, here in this call, care about this and make sure that we go at it.
I'll read a couple of comments that have come from the chat that I think are pertinent to this question. The first one is from Richard Ishida. And what he wrote is, if you use something like XMetal, that's XMETAL, to author the XML, it turns the markup into little UI buttons, which you can help a lot to avoid the salad that you get with pure markup. And I guess by salad, it's messy, difficult problems like you were talking about, Moriel. The next comment is from Don Fernoy. And he says the Oxygen XML editor supports the Bidi content for text in the content. And actually, there's one more comment that came through. It's from Bruce Bay Pornatter. He's saying, another trend is, I would say, Bidi isolation and Unicode wrapping. The idea is making the general idea of Bidi simpler for developers and translators so that they don't need to learn the exact details of the Bidi algorithm and its formatting controls. And I think that also echoes some of the things that you were talking about, Moriel and Osama, about trying to isolate the content when you know that you can and should. But I think, Moriel, your point about advocating for better tooling, I mean, even if we do have a few tools to help edit XML, it just seems like it's bigger. It's a more pervasive problem for XML, and better design, better tools with better design can really mitigate the problem.
And I think that getting your voice heard is really critical. I mean, maybe one thing that we have failed as a group or an organization, I'm speaking about my team in the company, is getting feedback from our users and customers. So we know that things are broken from a Bidi perspective or some other language perspective. We don't hear feedback because, as long as it works, then the users don't necessarily give us feedback. So regardless of whether the right to left is enabled or not. So we would love for the community to be more vocal in telling us what is going wrong, so that we can go actually and use this feedback to convince our developers to do the right thing. Sometimes that lack of feedback doesn't mean things are working. We know that for sure. We just need to hear it.
And I got a reminder as a plug for the first webinar in this Unicode Bidi webinar series is that you can learn from that webinar about working with Bidi markup and wrapping by going back and watching some of the things that people presented there. Okay, our next question from Babak Bolur. How do you consume Arabic translation strings into the display in UI labels? Moriel, Osama, do you have an idea about that? Because, I mean, I'll just say from my perspective, this sounds like if an engineering thing. It sounds like message format. I mean, it sounds like if you have a user-facing string, the internationalization best practices run it through message format. Don't hard code anything, right? And then we can kind of deal with that there. And we have a lot of webinars about message format 2, and some presentations in the Unicode Technology Workshop about that. But that's sort of coming from my perspective. Do you have anything there that you wanted to say or add?
No, I think maybe my question back is, when Babak says labels, does he mean menus or dialogues or things like that? So it depends on what he means by labels. But again, generally, I think what we just talked about applies to every UI element or content element, making sure that right to left is enabled, you do the right thing, you rely on the OS or the browser language. As long as you're doing all of these things the right way, then you should be okay, regardless of the element that you're looking at.
Okay, so our next question is, now we're getting into questions submitted from the Q&A. So the next one is from Olivia Dabo. And it says, thank you for the informative seminar. It's incredibly useful and insightful. I really appreciated the depth of knowledge shared. I currently support my team by fixing Bidi issues, which involves using Visual Studio to manually add Bidi support characters to the text. While this process works, I'm curious to know if you have a tool or solution that can automate this process, specifically a tool where we could simply push a button to add the Bidi characters, streamlining the workflow.
My first reaction is, ouch. That is very manual. I don't off the top of my head, but I'm fairly sure that either something exists that you can, there's keys that you can map. And so you can say, if I click this key or this menu, it will output something. Or if not, it's probably not too terrible to create for VS Code. We actually don't encounter that as much because we try to avoid. So even in the code, we have like a library that produces that instead of having to manually kind of insert that character. Again, just to make sure that there's no excuse not to use it. So all developers can just do it instead of having someone else, like it seems like you're doing, coming in and fixing it for people. So I would recommend just looking into that too, just having, like, if it's in the code, having potentially something that does it for you. But if it is kind of like a trick of clicking, VS Code has a whole bunch of those that can probably answer your specific need if need be.
Yeah, and if you're having to input all of these characters everywhere, then I think you have to revisit what you're doing, honestly. I mean, again, the less, the better. So just having that dir or having that one markup at the beginning of the code, and that takes care of everything. It goes, maintenance cost becomes extremely cheap if you have it that way, rather than just adding these characters everywhere. So I think the answer would be try to avoid what you're doing, honestly, regardless of whether you have a tool to automate what you're doing, because what you're doing is going just to impact that specific content. Long term, it's very expensive.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's a comment from Rusbeh that I'll read. And this is for this particular Visual Studio question. He says, I would recommend getting your developers, your Bidi developers, to port the open source Unicode wrap method backend developers to port the open source Unicode wrap method from Google or Android, and that would reduce a lot of Bidi headache. So it sounds like there is a Unicode wrap method somewhere in the Android open source code base that could help. And that's perhaps one way to solve it. But I guess, Osama, what you were speaking to, that this is kind of a what we call in the engineering world an XY problem. You're kind of focused on how do I solve this problem X, but your real problem is Y, and you need to kind of back up and revisit your end goal and maybe think of a solution that could work better. Maybe there's a better design or a better approach. The next question is from Gregory Beaver. He says, we use ICU message format for our translations stored in JSON and render them using i18n next on the front end with React i18n next. How would you recommend marking direction changes in the strings? Now, that is the question. It is Bidi related, but I would venture to say that maybe this isn't an Osama Moriel question. This might be more of a question for perhaps the part 2 webinar, but actually more than that, it might be more of a message format question or a message format 2 question. And I think you covered it. I want to say Addison had covered it, but by talking about isolation tags as like the proper way to do it when possible, or maybe this was Richard. Yeah, yeah. Oh, okay, sorry. So Gregory is indicating that he asked the same question in part 2 and they said wait for part 3. Okay.
I can say what we do. We also use JSON, as I explained before.
Mhm.
I just don't know IIT Next specifically, so I have no idea about specifics. But we have a secondary system that parses out templates. So I don't know if you can consider doing that, but then that would mean that people will not need to know, again, specifically control characters, which you could probably put in if you need to. They can just use inside your JSON some sort of wrapper. And then there's a secondary thing that before it actually produces the translation, it unwraps it to put the correct formatting. That can be something you can take a look at. I just don't know specifically that specific system, but that's what we do.
Okay. It looks like we've gotten to the end of our question list. If there are any other questions from the attendees, let us know. And we can wait a few seconds to kind of let people kind of formulate their thoughts about that. And if we don't have any questions, we can also say we've done a good job. We've explained everything that there is to know about Bidi. Of course not, but yeah. Oh, we have another question. Great. Oh, and then there's a comment. So let me read the comment first from Richard Ishida. If we're talking about changes in direction within a string, the W3C recommends wrapping every change in direction in something, be it markup, formatting character, or macros. So wrapping it in something when you have the change of direction. And I guess what you use depends on the format that you're typing in or your context. Yeah, that makes sense. So we have a question from one of the panelists. What do you teach your developers about Bidi? This is a great one.
Oh, we have a huge number of training materials that we have gathered over the past 15, 20 years in Microsoft. So we start with that. We ask them to take some training. I do think that usually they take the easy way out and just ask a developer who's an expert in Bidi. We used to have a separate group that was focused on enabling Bidi for the different applications that we have. Not anymore. We expect the product teams themselves in engineering organizations to enable Bidi. Again, I think it's a matter of having experts in place, and these experts usually give the right guidance. They offer training, and we have some limited testing going on as well. So we have some test solutions internally that can, either pseudo localize for right-to-left languages by, inputting a number of characters from different right-to-left languages, and usually the developers can easily figure out exactly what is going wrong through these solutions. But again, it's a matter of training, advocating, giving the right guidance, and at the end of the day, actually living with the fact that usually these experts are the backbone of what we do. If we don't have these experts that have had experience for many years and right to left, I think we would be in trouble, honestly. So I think ensuring that you have these SMEs in place makes a huge difference.
Yeah, for us, I think it's a little different. Like the Wikimedia Foundation has as a movement and has a mission of every single human being reading, right? So I think making sure that every single human being can have access to information means that we already, a lot of our staff and a lot of our volunteers are kind of in the mindset of knowing about different languages and different worlds, which is already a bonus for us. And we also tend to have outspoken communities. So we do hear about those problems. And those two things are very much bonus for us. It's not happening everywhere. And we're very much aware of that. But then when we talk to our developers, I think we do have a lot of, training materials on that. We have a lot of examples because we have big sites for that. But we also try to develop tools for them. So what I said before about libraries, there are code libraries. And so our training if they're interested in it, we can go into kind of like a little bit more of the technical stuff of how it works, but they don't have to be. Like they can, like we're trying to train them on, you need to always take that into account whenever you have any kind of string, and here are the tools that you need to use, and here's why. And I think that allows for a little bit easier kind of like constant doing, as we also show them examples. And then one time, I think we have one of the demonstrations we did that was really, really fun, was to take an entire, just purely English, I mean, with a little Bidi in it, but from the English perspective, just force it right to left just to show, demonstrate to people what that experience could look like, even if they don't know an RTL language and stuff like that. So they're kind of like things you can do to demonstrate, but I think we're trying to make it as easy as possible for everyone so that it's not like an overhead thinking. It's kind of like it's very natural to, obviously, I wrap all my messages and stuff like that. And that's the training that we're trying to give them.
And I think having speakers for these languages as consultants makes a huge difference. So most developers, they're trying to do the right thing. They do the right thing. They just want to have validation. A 5-minute phone call. How does this look? How does that look? And I think you'd be amazed at just having a few minutes of your time as a right-to-left speaker. That makes a huge difference. So I think developers usually want to do the right thing, and they're doing it. I think just having that consultation in place makes a significant improvement.
Moriel, you were talking about giving a demo of what it would look like if you had English or Latin text in written or presented in right to left, and you're saying that's useful. And I think Osama was talking about pseudo-locale, and that reminds me of what I've seen, which is what I've seen is that some people will use a pseudo-locale. So it'll be constructed with AR, but using a non-existent region code XB. And then if we send it off for translation, there's actually, instead of it going to a person, it would go to an automated program that will literally just reverse the letters of a word and reverse the words, perhaps, and then that's what it'll give you as a translation. So you can immediately see that you know that you're dealing with right to left, even if you're not, you only know English. You can at least see that, okay, I'm in a different context now. Does my UI fit? Do the words fit? Does it make sense?
It's also very easy to then see the light stuff, like the exclamation point being in the wrong end. And all you got to do for that is just like set up your like HTML page is like direction right to left, even though it's English. And then you just see all those things where it's not supported. So all those tricks are just visually impactful, like people don't realize. And then I think it's just, you know, to get them to understand what's going on.
And what you're talking about, these tricks, these are things that we've also seen in earlier webinars in this series. I think Richard covered that definitely in part 1. So if you haven't seen part 1 or part 2, please check those things out because it's really good material. I don't see any questions, but I think it's a good time to wrap up. I think we're almost at time. So let me pull up some content and share. Okay, so here are some bidirectional text resource links that we think you'll find useful. These will also be shared as a PDF in the chat today, and they can be found in the confirmation emails that you received for today's session. So here's one set of links, and here's some more. As I mentioned, the part 1, part 2, and information from MediaWiki and TranslateWiki. And then the first slide, we had a lot of resources from W3C. They do a lot of really good content there. So I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the organizational members of Unicode, as well as our industry and media partners who support the work that happens at Unicode, which includes Bidi Text, as you heard today. So here are industry and media partners, And again, thank you to our organizational members. Event updates are shared in our e-newsletters, on our events page at unicode.org, and on social media. Unicode Technology Workshop, UTW 2025, currently has event host and sponsorship opportunities. So please reach out to events@unicode.org if your company is interested. And this is the upcoming planned Unicode Technology Workshop for this year. As a nonprofit, open source, open standards organization, Unicode is funded by membership fees and donations from individuals, corporations, and other organizations. So please consider becoming a Unicode member if you aren't already, and adopting a character or making a donation. Your tax-deductible donation fuels innovation and inclusivity in global digital communication. And now I would like to thank Moriel and Osama for sharing your insights and answers in the Q&A. Thanks to our logistics team today and for making this event possible. And finally, thanks to all of you in attendance for making this event a success. We plan to have the recordings for the event available in the coming weeks. And a survey will be shown right after the session ends, and again within 24 hours of this event for any feedback that you'd like to share. For general questions regarding Unicode, please visit home.unicode.org. And we hope that you stay connected for more information, future events, and please feel free to share any information that we've shared today with any folks that you know. And with that, have a great rest of your day or evening.